The title you all know, and I basically will walk you through the question of why are we coding in the first instance, in order then to be able to answer the question whether generative AI actually can take away the coding. And then, of course, it's a question, is it a dream for you, or do you think coding is still useful? You still want to do it. So there are, of course, all these different points of views that we could also discuss. But this hypothesis, in a sense, was, well, coding is just a lot of work, and if we can just skip that step, that maybe that would be a dream. And just for those who haven't followed me, just a few words, I started to look at generative AI, already for a year now, but more at the beginning of the year, of how it was implemented in different applications and also across the board, not necessarily the qualitative research, social science research fields, but also across the board a bit, marketing research, because there are also lots of tools there. And then I started to blog about it, and because I just thought that was interesting. That was, I like to do that. People started to ask my advice, people who, also developed some tools. And then the idea occurred, well, why don't I write my own tool, which is Scalura AI, which we almost about to release. Those who are in software development knows it's crunch time. It might also, we hope now, kind of for every day now, that it's going to be ready. I mean, the beta version, so it's not the perfect full version, but that's what we want to start. So that was basically kind of a process, because with your own tool, you can kind of implement your own vision. If you give ideas to other people, then they implement how they envision it. And I have a particular vision of how I think qualitative analysis can be implemented using generative AI. And I think that will also become clearer in this presentation. So where does the term or the process, or not only the term, but the process of coding come from? And I'm going rather quickly through these slides. They're quite detailed. If you're in my communities, I also share the slides, so you can also kind of do something with the slides, just looking at the slides. But this is courtesy to basically Fielding and Lee, that have been written the book Computer Analysis and Qualitative Research, and they kind of did that historical view, and I was kind of stealing a bit from them here when they describe the whole process. But if you're interested in that, it's a whole long book chapter. So the first mention basically was already about 100 years ago, in 1928, when it was talked about that skilled research workers are able to rearrange data observed in interviews so that remarks concerning one topic can be grouped together. And that's kind of what we do with coding. And we can group everything together that relates to one topic. Then marketing research was talking about this already in 1937, talking about classification of open-ended responses. And then I think if you, in the social science, you have heard about Robert Merton, you have heard about Adorno. These are big names, and there's very classical studies that I've been doing. So Robert Merton wasn't using the term coding yet, but he was actually developing elaborated classification system for his data. Adorno then started to talk about categorization and classification in the 1950s, and then became more mainstream. So that was actually all before we had CACTUS computer programs to support qualitative data analysis. So then we see some references here where they very freely and frequently use the words code, coding, and encodes. So you're probably also familiar, if you're in the social science, with the Boys in White or the Street Corner societies. So these were the first people actually also using that work and also implementing that procedure of coding. And in the Boys and White study, Becker and Gill were writing that it kind of became a necessity to also describe how they were doing it, because that field where they were doing the study in educational research was dominated by psychology and very quantitatively oriented. So they needed to make it explicit what they were doing. And that's where they described that procedure. And they were also saying, well, it wasn't really something novel and new that we were actually doing. That way of systematically extraction of material that was already there. And I guess you all know it, and people still do it today, to mark field notes or transcripts with different colored pencil. So people did that before even Cactus came around. And that is a procedure also described by Becker et al. In 1984, so that they were coding summarized field notes. And now the important bit that I want to point out is that last sentence here. The aim is to use a set of systematic procedures to turn up all items of relevance to a particular proposition. So why are we coding? We are coding to be able then to retrieve data in a systematic way. And we see that also, if you look more and more into that. So that is White in the Street Corner Society. And this is also an interesting, or for me, I think it's fascinating, like historically how that all developed. And if you're interested also more in that, there is this presentation from tape recorder to generative AI, which I also have written up in the blog, and the recording is also available in the communities. So at the beginning, I guess, because it all was too much and all too much to handle, it was going from case-based to code-based. And that also had to do with technology that came around. And I found this very interesting, that they were coming from, from where they only talk to professionals to like a situated listening to the detailed recording of everyday life. So that seems to be so normal for us today that we are doing that. And all kind of, giving a high level interview with somebody who kind of describes a more larger context, but kind of really looking into detail. And White also learned from von Arnsberg and the writing like that, getting down a detailed report of actual behavior. So all of that was also leading to the necessity of coding, because then the tape recorder was available, and already a bit in the 1950s, but that was all like big things. So when the handheld tape recorder came around, that was more in the 60s. Then suddenly people were citing people word by word, and this forced the researcher to construct finer categories of analysis. So it was also back then technology who pushed method forwards, and it necessitated then also transcription, and necessitated to then code data to look more closely, and to lead to that what we have been now actually doing, or a lot of people have been doing the last, I think it's also incredible. So almost 40 years that we have computational qualitative data analysis. So if we look there at what codes and coding means, well, you have just some definitions. Saldana might be a name for a lot. He wrote the coding manual. So a code is most often a word or short phrase that symbolically assigns a summative, salient, essence, capturing, and so on, a word to a piece of text, basically. So we kind of all know those kind of definitions. Again, then what I have here in bold, a process that permits data to be divided, grouped, reorganized, linked to consolidate meaning. So we code data in order to, because we need to manage a couple hundred of pages of transcripts. So how else would you want to do it? I mean, you can read it, but you forget half of it. So there was this necessity of coding data. And this is basically the second part here, and the code is then used both to represent and to access those passages along with other data that are the same or similar. So we code things that are similar, and then we build categories, and we have subcodes, and all of that. Category is gathering things about a larger theme, subcodes within the theme, but also again things that are similar within the subcode and under the large theme and so on. So all those things that we learn when we talk about building a code system. But why are we doing that? And there is, of course, something to say about there is already some analysis happening while we build the code system, but especially with computer-assisted analysis, we use the codes in order to retrieve data. We will see in a minute that this was, especially in grounded theory, it was actually done a little bit different. And then the character software actually was having an influence on how people actually deal with that. So again, the way the coding provides a means to purposefully manage, locate, identify, sift, and sort and query the data. So just to see that, I always like to give like a bunch of references to always say, but it's not one person, it's kind of if you look across the literature. So it provides a means to access evidence. And the reason why I'm presenting this to you is here, this is what we want to achieve. And now with AI around the corner, the question is, can we achieve that in a different way and maybe in a more comfortable, more people also talks about efficiency. I don't like all these promises, analysis down from 60 hours to 2 minutes or whatever. It's still gonna take some time. It probably is faster than going through the entire coding process, but it's not kind of bringing it down to a minute, because what I don't believe in is the click on the button. You click on the button, AI does thematic analysis for you or does the grounded theory for you, and here comes the result. And then we have all the discussions about bias and how they are trained, and because if you believe the AI can do the analysis with you, click on the button, that's when you have all those questions, and that's when you should ask all those questions. But I will show you a different way of doing that, where the AI is going to be your assistant, but it's not delivering the final results. That's still you that have to put that together. So Richards, that's Lynn Richards. Richards and Richards are the ones who developed Nudist and later what's now known as NVivo. She also has written a number of books on qualitative data analysis and also computer-assisted analysis. So she writes that coding is about data retention and compares that to quantitative coding, where coding is data reduction. And that is also sometimes what we see if people just ask AI to code, and then they just get a bunch of codes. If you do that with ChatGPT, then well, you have some codes, but where's the data behind it? Yeah, so that would be more data reduction, but that's not the purpose of coding. The purpose of coding is to help us manage the data, organize the data, sift through the data. Yeah, and as it says here, it's about data retention, to be able to pull that out. So to learn from the data, to keep revisiting until we understand. Jumping into my examples here. This won't be, I won't be going through the entire analysis. That would take a bit longer than the time we have here. It's just to give you an idea how I would approach analysis by I call this going into dialogue with the bot. And I've been, of course, doing that so long. I just, I tell it off and I do this and it's if it doesn't give me the right answer, it's like, no, this is not what I was asking you for. I was asking you for this. And then of course if you have played around, then bots apologize and I'm sorry. And anyway, but it is kind of also some form of conversation, because the bot also learns from you. If you say, this is not what I've been asking, or listen to my question, or look at my question, or go a bit deeper, it will do that. And so you, in a sense, you can also train it a bit in doing that. So what I've done here, I as an example here, I looked for 5 reports on what is the effect of generative AI or artificial intelligence, maybe more general, on the labor market or on the modern world of work. And there are, of course, different ways how this can be approached, but the way I approach it, we'll get to that in a second. So I had like 4 research questions, and we only will kind of touch on the first, because what I think it becomes very important is the design, having a clear idea what you want. With grounded theory, then that's a bit of a different approach, because you kind of still maybe looking at what the essence is, or what what is of interest to the people you are researching. So that's a bit of a different approach, but that also works. So this is more a content analysis, semantic analysis I'm doing here. And yeah, I'm just watching the time. And I also have prepared some bits how you could approach grounded theory doing that. So, but let's assume you want to do a content analysis. So we have some articles here, and it's about the content. And then you have to think about what you want to know about the data, because now you have to ask questions. And the better your questions are, the better will be your answers. And if your questions are not really precise, that's what you will get back. And that's why I think it's this AI, if you want to work with AI, that whole part of getting the design right and thinking about that stage very well will become even more important. I mean, it should be there already, but maybe some people kind of get by, and then while they code data, then things become clearer. But here you get the data, and then you have to ask questions. So by now you might have read my research question here. So how is generative AI changing the requirements for professional skills? What impact does generative AI have on job security? To what extent does generative AI promote or inhibit creativity? And the last one, it's on ethical issues. So that would be a kind of a nice study to questions to go through. As I said, based on time, don't go through all of that. So what I did in this particular one is that I went document by document, because sometimes if you just upload all of the documents, then you ask a question, then you get maybe half a page summary or whatever, and it's less detail. It's a wrong word, but it's too general in a sense. So that's why I felt here I should go kind of document by document, and I can kind of tell you a little bit about what's the difference between what we are developing right now with Qualitative AI and ChatGPT. Is one thing is, well, you just start creating a project, and then you can upload all those questions. You can give the background information. You can provide your research objectives, everything behind the study. You can upload, so the bot that you're going to work with has that as secondary information. It knows that it's not primary data. This is about the study. So you provide the necessary context. And with those type of data, it would be, it's not important, but if you have interview data, it's recognizing speakers, you can assign values. So like you can compare males with females, people of different educational background. So the normal kind of social sign things we also have in other programs, that you then can ask specifically, now let's look at that particular research question and just compare answers of male and female respondents or whatever variable you are interested. So that kind of makes it a lot already different from what you can do with ChatGPT, apart from having a reporting memo function and so on. So here, my prompt was, I would like to know what answers because it's just reports, it's not interviews, what answers Doc 1 gives to the first research question. How does generative AI change the requirements for professional skills in different professional fields? Should talk slower, I guess, but there's so much to go through. Good that you can read what I was just trying to say. This doesn't read very well, my question here, but generative AI is very forgiving. Even if the grammar isn't right, if you don't do that question mark in the end, it kind of will understand you. If there's a typo, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, I mean, if the question is too bad in the way you have formulated is, you will see that with the answer. The answer won't be good. Then you can reformulate that. But anyway, so that was my prompt. I just copied and pasted in here. And then it was giving me the answer from that first document. And that first document was talking about these scenarios that you find here. That was what that document was all about. I don't want to kind of go into all of these answers, just to kind of give you a little bit of an idea of what comes out in the end. And then I was asking for the change or the effect on professional skills, and then it was saying, well, depending on the scenarios, there might be minimal changes, or there might be very, very large changes. So it depends on what scenario will become reality. And then it also was picking out on the different scenarios here, and then if we think the dynamic transformation or vision scenario will become true, then there will be the requirement for new expertise. So here it was pulling out the answer from that document. Then I was moving on to Doc 2, and I was just basically asking, so stay with research question 1, now look at document 2. So here it was talking about changes in job profiles. It says the adoption in this document, they also were saying they expect to bring will bring about profound changes, some transformation of competency. So for some people, it will mean substituting, or the A will substitute the job. For others, it will be actually supporting them, and there will be an increase or demand of certain technical skills. And just kind of pay attention, of course, the more documents we will go through, the more repetition there will be. And then it talks about the professions that will be affected, programming and writing professions. Then the need to adapt to AI. Well, I can make certain. It's great, yeah. So the both sides of the medallion basically is that certain technical skills will be obsolete, but other skills will be actually required. So we see a shift actually in skills. That is what document 2 was all about. Then, because it was talking about the professionals or that were affected, or the professions that were affected, I was then asking a follow-up question. So once you're in that process of asking about your research question, of course, it's not just that one big research question that you have. You start out with a question, then something comes up, and then you see, okay, now write out a list of the professions that are affected. And of course, it can do that. So it gave me the professions that were affected. So it's like 8 of them. And of course, as we always know, it's always giving a summary, but that's what it's trained for. For every question or every list that you actually pull out, it always, in the end, gives you a summary. It can be nice, and sometimes it can be a bit too much. But here's just summarizing it especially influences those professions that depend on data processing, analytics, and creative or writing intensive activity. So it kind of writes that. So whatever, and this is just an example. So whatever that kind of strikes you and say, well, I want to learn more about, or whether they talk about programming and writing, you can ask follow-up questions on that to get more in-depth information about that. Or tell me more about did they write more about the shift in requirements? So you get more detail. What you don't have here, because I didn't do that yet with Coludo AI, but if you do that with Coludo AI, you will get references. You can click on the reference, it will pop up, and you can read where is it actually coming from. So you don't have to believe what it's writing, so you can actually kind of go back and see where it's coming from. And if that pop-up is not enough for you, you can click on the pop-up and it leads you to the full text. So there is that layer of transparency where you can kind of follow through and see where this is coming from, not just having to believe what the AI is delivering here. Then I went to document three, and then you see, then we start getting into some repetition, shift of requirements towards less routine, more complex task. And then, this document, they all had the same kind of topic, but all had a different focus. So these ones were talking about routine task and non-routine task, requiring social interpersonal skills. So every document was kind of, in a way, categorizing this in their own different ways. And of course, what we do in analysis, we're trying to then at some point figure out what are the commonalities, what are the difference, and where do they agree or have different opinions and so on. So they also talk about professions as also in the other documents that were less affected by AI because they're less affected by automations. They're not routine, they require interpersonal skills, so those will be less affected. Then we have that in document 4, and here is about kindergarten teachers. So so here that is in document 4. So we get also the risk of automation is reported less for kindergarten teachers. So we get some similarities already going on here. So as a researcher, if you read this, you can start, writing up that in your notes, what you start seeing coming up again and again. But of course, you can also ask the AI later to look for similarities across the document. But this is where it's not just kind of reading this and saying, oh, these are the results. I mean, if you would produce that, you would end up 150 pages. So it's now you working with it, whatever it pulls out. It's basically like also when you look through coded documents, you also need to then start summarizing what you read in order to then reduce that information and then to start linking information to each other. And then document 5 discussed something that hadn't been discussed in other documents. Yeah, he was talking about the more overall about the effect on the labor market. And here it was actually talking about considering of training occupations in the course of ecological transformation. There could be a growing shortage of skilled workers, blah, blah. I said, I don't really understand what is this all about. So I ask again a follow-up question. And as I already mentioned, I kind of keep it very conversational, so I don't quite understand the last point. Can you please give me some more information? And then I get that more information. So I hope you can already kind of start seeing what I'm getting at, that the AI knows all of the data, everything that I can't keep in my brain. And in order to do that, or what I needed to do previously, I need to start coding this stuff so I could retrieve the information based on what I've coded. Now I can just ask a question and the AI retrieves what I'm looking for. Then there is an option also to ask the AI. Now we have looked at everything related to question 1 and where are the overlaps, and please pull that out, but also give me the ones single out the items that are different. So not only looking at commonalities, but also look at what what are the individual responses. So I get that here as well. One other thing you could also do is you could read what it gives you, write that up in your own summary, upload, you copy and paste that into your chat box, and then ask the AI to kind of say, well, this is my summary now from what I learned from you about everything around question 1. And can you please check that against the data? Does that seem to be correct? And that can also be like an interesting exercise to do that. So you kind of use that to confirm what you're actually doing. And then if you have coded the data based on just working through that first question, well, you probably would have coded for types of profession that are affected, reasons why they're affected, reasons why they're not affected, type of effects, yeah, substitution or supporting the jobs, future scenarios, the outlook is positive, negative. Yeah, do we think we have more jobs or less jobs, or it's going to kind of equal out, whatever the responses are, and new skills that are required. So these were the natural things that you probably would have in your code system. And this is an example for, I started now with the first 5 documents. If I had 25 documents, or you have somebody in the beta who has 500 documents, and then the strategy would be, okay, just maybe start with the first 5 documents, 6 documents, work on the issues that are in the data material, and then you can go and ask, okay, now I've figured out that new skill requirements are A, B, C. Can you find those aspects also in the other documents? Please pull the data where everything about social emotional skills are reported in the other documents. So I necessarily wouldn't, say this is always for like, no, we can go berserk and always have, 500 documents or do 500 interviews. But some people have a lot of data they want to analyze. Throw 500 documents into the AI can do that, but it becomes very difficult to control the outcome and evaluate whether the outcome fits or not. But this would be a plausible approach to do that, to start with a few documents and come up with basically generate some themes that come up. And then some people might use that, well, so you do a form of coding in a sense, but not like going systematically through all documents and attaching the code. So the procedures that we have done the last, and it's like you have seen, it's 100 years now, they are still valid, how we analyze data. It's just the way of how we can go about them. And yeah, so that could be a way forward. And there is a paper I can put, I have to look that up, but maybe I can also put that as a reference at the end of the presentation, where they have played around with induction and deduction. And they actually did find out that, or in their research, the AI was better in deductive coding. They were playing around with coding. So if you give it a bunch of categories, then it would perform better than if it would be suggesting categories, and they were benchmarking that against human coding. So I could see that this would be an interesting opportunity once you have developed some ideas, whether you call them ideas or themes or whatever, you can go then and ask about those in the data. So having kind of taken you a little bit through the content of this, if you go look now at the second research question, which is about data security, not data security, job security, then you can already, I at least can already see some connections going that I can already see kind of how things are related in the data. Of course, it talks about certain types of jobs and then which will be more affected and less affected. And then, of course, that also has to do then with job security. So it will probably pull some of the same data again, but that would be kind of equivalent that we would attach multiple codes to certain data segments that, if it would be a substitution, then job security would be in danger. So we see that here as well. And in this way, you can also, then the more you work with your data, then you start seeing how things are related more and more, and in that process of analysis. And that, of course, should be the aim, that in the end, if you have worked through all of your research questions, that you can see how things are related in the data. And now I want to go through the ground theory, and I maybe just try to do that in 10 minutes, so that we have some time to discuss. That means I'm going to skip some of the slides here. So for those who are familiar, I think that's nothing new. The constant comparison is at the heart of the method, and one begins with constant comparison by examining incidents in the data, and incidents could be a thought that is expressed, an attitude that is expressed, an experience that people talk about. One reason, and also the feeling, at least right there in that book, that word coding has been established, also has been because grounded theory has been using it, but they have been using it quite differently from what we do in Cactus, and I've kind of been written that extensively and some of my writings. And then you can have these in vivo codes or code by sociological constructs, but this is still Glaser and Strauss. While they code in that is kind of a bit different. They code an incident for a category and compare it with previous incident coded in the same category. And before you do further coding, you should recall or go back and look at all incidents previously coded using the same category. And this process, and I think we do that all implicitly. And if I teach and we do that first coding exercise, and in my workshops, whether it's Max Relay or the Atlas, doesn't matter, would apply to any software, people kind of like, we started coding, but then I went back again and started at the beginning. But that's like, then I would say, this is how it works. You start and you get to know more data, and then you see, I had something up there that might fit as well. So that's the whole process of developing ideas and see, that process of constant comparison. And that is actually the brilliant explanation why this AI coding in Atlas doesn't work, because the AI doesn't do exactly that. It just looks at paragraph per paragraph per paragraph and doesn't go back in order then to aggregate. And that's why we end up then with 2,000 codes. So Stefan, Max Ude has done that much better, just to say that here. And it might be, that in the future, that whole process is changed, but the way it's implemented now, that's exactly the reason why AI cannot just, with a click of a button, does the coding for you, because the whole process of coding is a different one than just attaching words to a paragraph and the next paragraph and the next paragraph. It's always this constant comparison that we do in order to build a code system. The most important point of this slide is that they say, well, code and stop and write memos and write about why do you use this code now, or what did we learn now while we're doing that. So there's always this constant back and forth between coding and memo writing, because that helps us then to move codes also to a more conceptual theoretical level. What they then do in the second stage of coding, they do this, again, continuation of constant comparison and then integrating categories. And what then happens is they were looking at data and see whether it will kind of, comparing new data against existing categories and see whether they would help to understand the category further, and either adding some new categories if it didn't fit, or even letting that go. So because I didn't have computers, of course, they weren't just systematically coding all data, but they also were saying that it's not necessarily necessary as what people then started to do. What I find very interesting about these are all quotes. Open coding involves a dialogue with a generative purpose. So generative purpose means generating concepts or categories that then become the building blocks of theory. The dialogue is often an internal one, as the analyst confronts and records reactions to the data in writing memos, but it can also be a dialogue with a colleague. And that can be perfectly simulated with the AI. This is where the AI can really help, especially in the process of open coding. And this is only what I'm going to show here, and I think it might also help later on with what I presented before. If you already have your concepts, you can then just ask the AI, do you find more data about these that fit that concept that I already have explained before, to support this kind of process. The guidelines for open coding are that you constantly should asking the question, who is doing that, what is doing, the W question, who, so W in English, well, who, what, when, and so on. If you're into grounded theory, you know those questions. Then they also say important is that data are selected at that microscopical level, line by line, sentence by sentence. And of course, not through the entire data set, but just to start the open coding. And that's where I see where it goes often wrong in Cactus, that people think they have to go line by line with all of their documents. But that's another topic here. And again, should be frequently interrupted by memos. So let's look at an example from Strauss. You might be familiar that did a lot of research in health research and the study on dying of I don't know whether it was from the study of dying, but at least that was also field notes in the hospital. She changed the blood transfusion back. So what did Strauss do with open coding? Well, he immediately realized that within that sentence, it's a task, division of labor, supplies. So the task is changing the blood transfusion, division of labor. In that sense, the patient couldn't do anything. He was just kind of awakening from surgery. And so she was doing it, and it was done to him. And supplies are the back. And then he was looking at the properties of the task. It's visible to others, it's simple, it's quick. It you need a certain skill level in that example, low. And then you can also think about a frequency. The novice qualitative researcher would probably having a bit more difficulty to immediately spot within that sentence these three types of concepts. I'm giving you another example that I actually learned from Juliet Corbin that helps you actually to move more to the conceptual level from the data. And that is basically also what they describe in their book, because they find that novice researchers they find that process very difficult. So what Strauss then did, he was then thinking further about the supply, and so what happens if the hospital runs out of bags for blood? And then the next idea is, okay, that is relevant for the safety of the patient. And then he gets to the organizational procedure. So you see that how very quickly from that one sentence, we are at, on a very conceptual level, safety of patients, organizational procedures, just all based on that sentence. Coding it on a descriptive level, just that sentence might be, a lot of people probably would just code that if they code very descriptively, changing blood transfusion, but that is not the point of open coding. The point of open coding is really moving quickly, breaking the data open to that conceptual level. If you are not Strauss and if you are not trained, if you're still a novice researcher or just want a little bit of help, you can just ask that GenAI. So this is my prompt. I want to apply the process of open coding according to grounded theory methodology to the following sentence. She changed the blood transfusion back. What categories do you suggest? And it came up with all of that. And some of that are already kind of a mix of and this one is, I don't see properties that much. But then yeah, that's always a problem sometimes with AI, just gives you too much. You can also just say, there's another prompt, apply the ground theory approach, open coding to this sentence, and suggest 3 concepts. Here's a sentence to analyze. She changed the blood transfusion bag. And then it came up with 3 concepts. And then explained the 3 concepts, and you can see what I highlighted here in color is already, a bit of the, some properties you might continue to work with. But you can then also ask it for the properties. So I asked it for the properties of the task, and it came up with technical skills, precision and care, sequence of safety measures, time sensitive, and so on. So some of this kind of is the same, or kind of overlaps a bit with that what Strauss came out with. But the point with open coding is it's not that there is one single privileged reading of the data. So everybody kind of can do that in their own way. It's a springboard to think more broadly about the implications of the material. So to what we have seen, to just from that one sentence, think about patient safety, think about organizational procedures, what needs to happen, that the nurse needs the bags in order to change them, so they need to be there. So there need to be some other things in place. So that's what this is all about. And you see also the properties that are suggested here also bring us immediately to another level that goes much beyond descriptive. And then again, you could also ask it for maybe just give me 3 properties, not to be overwhelmed. And then you start writing memos. That's not like, okay, I have that list now. No, stop and write memos. Yeah, so, and go into the writing process to start thinking about it. But instead of you having to go into dialogue with yourself, coming up with all these ideas, the AI can help you to do so. This other example here is something I use always in my workshops. It's about parenting and happiness. And here's a sentence: I was happy before I had kids and I'm happy now. However, the first year of motherhood was rough. I was only 25 and becoming a mom forced me to grow up. All of a sudden, I had to become a lot less selfish and a lot more responsible, which is not easy in a culture that glorifies self-centeredness and irresponsibility. I'm a better person for becoming a mom, even if I'm not any happier. So what you can do in order to get an idea for concepts is looking for words that kind of spring at you, like rough and forced, or always like flag words like only 25. Why is she writing that? You can think about glorify. You can think about responsibility, self-centeredness. Another interesting one is she starts with motherhood. She ends with mom. Why is she doing that? So there's lots to write about in this sentence, and you can ask, again, AI to help you with that. So provide an in-depth analysis of the words forced and rough. What is the meaning of those words generally, and what are condition, causes, consequences, and strategies? These are the things ground theory often asks for. And then interpret those words in the meaning of the context of the text. And then it gave me all of these general meaning and about condition and causes. So it has something to do with lack of choice, autonomy, and so on. And if you think through rough, you kind of get something. It also has, if something is rough, it's also mostly outside of your control. This is just something that's there. So something very similar that I've done also previously manually before we had generative AI. And so you get all of that. You can have at least some suggestion here of what could this mean for your text. And I don't believe in that kind of taking that as a result. It's a suggestion. You can then work with that. It's not a button, here's a result. Just take it, think it through, and work with that. And the point was then here, because everybody is always talking about the AI can read between the lines and it can find patterns for you. And well, it kind of finds language patterns, but that is on the technical bit. That's not the kind of patterns we are looking for as qualitative researchers. I was asking it, if you read between the lines, what are the potential meanings of being forced into parenthood? And how does this relate to the word glorified? And it wasn't reading between the lines. It was nicely staying within the text, because I was just giving it that one paragraph. So it wasn't hallucinating or making something up. It was staying within that. And even though I've kind of asked to read between the lines. And yeah, so it was giving me that. And then I was actually saying it, well, think out of the box. Consider the idea that being forced for this mother means that the pregnancy was not planned. It just happened. What is then your interpretation? So first, when I actually kind of infused that idea that the words you used, forced and rough, could that maybe mean it was an unplanned pregnancy? And then it was giving me an answer. And that's also, unplanned pregnancy, lack of course. Then it was kind of, thinking through with me about that. And in terms of development of concepts, it was not so much about whether this was an unplanned pregnancy for that one woman who wrote that statement. It was more like, okay, now I have a concept. How is parenting experienced if a pregnancy was planned or if it was not planned? And some other people were more explicit about that. And so this is all about. And another concept that can be developed from that is transformation and so on. So this is just a process for you to how you can work through that in order to develop concepts, and then you can continue to apply those concepts to other data that you have and that are coming in. And so I almost took all the time. If you have a few more minutes or want to write your answer in the chat, I'd like you, or if you have, maybe have a few minutes to still talk about that. So the title was Life Without Coding. Does AI fulfill the dream? What's your answer?